So how's everybody doing today? Good, good, good. So we've been doing a series called Home for the Holidays, and this is going to be the third and final installment on that series. But I was just thinking the other day how years ago I asked a girl to the gym, to go to the gym with me, and she stood me up, and I knew that the two of us weren't going to work out. So this wife is talking to her husband, and she said, "How would you describe me?" And he said, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. And she said, "Wow." She goes, "What does that mean?" He said, A, adorable, B, beautiful, C, cute, D, delightful, E, elegant, F, fashionable, G, gorgeous, and H, hot. And she said, "Wow, thank you." She said, "What about the I, J, K?" He said, "Oh, I'm just kidding." Oh, my goodness. So just really quickly by review, I want to talk about how the first installment of this series, Home for the Holidays, we talked about a tension that's created by the ideals that God gives us from His perspective of heaven and His perspective of how from the beginning He originally intended relationships to be, marriage to be, families to be, and the tension of how we live them and how our reality doesn't meet that ideal. And so there's a tension there. And we talked about still embracing the revelation from Scriptures and what God gives us and always aspiring to go in that direction because it's godly and it's good and it's right. And then the second week we talked about conflict, that all relationships experience conflict. There are no perfect relationships, whether it's a marriage relationship, whether it's husband and wife and children, or children to parents, and that's why we started this series, Home for the Holidays, because it's the holidays and people are getting together with family more this time of year, and there can be a lot of tension there. And so we talked about how do you de-escalate tension and how do you solve conflict? How do you work in the area of conflict? And so we kind of covered those two bases, and today, for the third time and the final time, we're going to talk about parenting. And so I'm going to ask Darlene to join me. We've never done this before. In 29 years of being here at New Life, we've never done this before, so I'm asking Darlene to join me.
Oh, this could be fun.
Darlene had 3 children, Janelle, Timothy, and me. I won't mention which one gave her the hardest time.
Yeah, the one that's still at home.
And here we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
My turn now. We do have this like little bit of a script, but all right. So you want to put up the first picture? We have 2 children, and this is Janelle, and many of you know her. She served as a worship leader here, but while she was growing up, she worked in Sunday school. She was in youth group. When she was born 32 years ago, we were at the hospital, and I noticed she was like making sounds then, like, you know, ooh, ooh. And it's like, little did I know that was her first beginnings of a life of being a talker. And she hasn't stopped since. I think she has about 15,000 words a morning that she needs to get out. But my gosh, she was fun, and we were so glad to have her. 3 years later, and this is her husband, Austin. Man, she picked a great guy to marry. We are so thankful for him. The 2 of them together are fun to watch. They both give as good as they get. She has a lot of her father in her when it comes to being funny. Oh yeah, they're a lot of fun. And then we had Timothy 3 years later. He's 29 now, and that's a picture of him. He is part of the Tahoe Nordic Search and Rescue Team, and he also works as a home designer out in Truckee, California, which is part of the Sierra Nevadas. He is an avid outdoorsman. Fun kid. When he was little, there was actually a little golden book called Busy Timmy, and that was a good description of him. Timothy is almost mini-me of Ken. So you can guess that in our house, there was a lot of laughter, a lot of fun, a lot of right to the edge. To this day, when they were young, I would teach them that rude is not funny, it is just rude. And Timothy to this day will say, funny is not rude, it's just funny. And it's like, oh. Okay. So in all of those, so when we knew we were having children, we wanted to be ready as much as you can. Once we had them, we find out no matter what you do, you're never ready. And so we would go to classes, we would read books. And one of the other things that I did, and Ken did as well, is there was a couple in our church, but because I babysat their children, I saw them a little bit more, was Pastor Dan and Angela, and I saw how they were raising their children. And for me, to see how somebody else is doing it brings it home so much more. And so we learned a lot from them. And there was that, and it's, is it your turn?
Sure. So yeah, one of the things that we did is, and it was kind of strange for me being a young guy, and they would have classes at our church on parenting or on marriage and things like that. And I was a single guy, and I would go to all these classes. I just thought, well, hey, it's education. But it really was starting to lay a foundation of preparing for marriage. And then when Darlene and I got engaged and we went in to see our senior pastor to start the whole premarital counseling thing, he really gave us some good advice. And I just want to say that this morning, as we talk about parenting, we are certainly not going to be sitting here as experts and saying that we're teaching you how to do this, because every family's different, every child's different. We certainly can look back over the years and see a lot of things that we did wrong. Wish you could wind the clock back and go back and undo some of those things. But we're just going to share some things that work for us that we learned, and if you can learn anything from it. And I know that a lot of you are no longer, you don't have children at home anymore, but you might be grandparents. And it's always good that no matter what we learn as Christians, we become storehouses that we can give to other people. So maybe your children, you can speak into their lives and help them, or other people you work with, that you have an opportunity to share some things, and that's what we want to do. So I just want to let you know that we're not up here as the know-it-alls about parenting. We're just sharing some things that we stumbled and bumbled through. But one of the things our pastor said when we were getting married is, he said, I advise you not to have children for at least 2 years. And that was just a great bit of wisdom. He said, you're getting married, just enjoy each other and enjoy your married life together, and then plan your family accordingly. And so we did. And then he said, it's also a good idea to just wait 2 years between children. Not too long, and we took that advice as well, and it worked out well for us. So,
Alrighty. So when Janelle was little, in her very first VBS, she was 3, and this is her first scripture that she learned at VBS, Psalm 127:3, the very beginning. Children are a gift of God, and as we looked at it, when we enjoyed that gift that God gave us. And so because there was enjoyment in that, it just, we were happy they were there. They were part of our family, and we built on a foundation of love. But while we were having fun, because, hey, Ken's offspring, you can only imagine, there was a lot of laughter in our home. But while we were having fun with them, we kept in mind that they were in training. We were raising, these were little people that we were raising up and we were training, and we wanted them to be secure in our love. But you know what? Parenting is 24 hours a day. And so those training moments happen. And when I was getting this ready, I was thinking, parenting is the longest boot camp in the world. You're just in it. You're in it, and there is no escape. You're there. So let's just, we wanted to make it the best that we could. Galatians 6:9 talks about, let us not lose heart, in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. And that's a really good foundational scripture for parenting. It's like, okay, I can't lose heart. I have told them no 10 times. I'm going to have to say it the 11th. We have gone to the store. They said, I want this. No, you can't have it. No, no, no. And you know what? If I cave after the 5th time, they're going to learn. They just need to ask 6. And so there's a saying I've come up with, either you train the dog or the dog trains you. And it's the same with kids. Either I'm going to teach my children how I want them to obey, how I want them to live, or they're going to teach me how I need to react when they are unkind or pitch a fit or yell and scream. So in the midst of all of that, we don't want to lose heart. We just need to last 2 seconds longer than they do, and we are adults, and so we can do it. Some of the goals that we had for their characters was that they would love God and have a relationship with Him. We wanted them to be able to function in society, that other people would enjoy them and not be like, oh my gosh, here they come, let's leave. We also wanted them to learn how to get along with others and succeed in life, as well as have good relationships with us as adults. And that good relationship with us as adults may not be something that's going to happen every single moment. They may not just think mom and dad are cool and great and wonderful every moment of their lives. We want them to think that a lot, but occasionally it's okay if they don't. Because overall, we are more interested in the long term of their character than in the immediate, whether they were happy with us in that moment. So not always easy to do. It's not. You know, there's times when it's like, I want you to like me. I don't feel very good about myself today. But long term, we had to keep that in mind. The other thing, it's still my turn to talk. Well, not in mine. Oh, you're right, I did, and they're important. Okay, go back and say it.
So, so when Darlene was teaching the kids, she also had to include me in on that because, you know, she was trying to teach them good manners, to be nice to each other, and I was teaching Tim how to tease Janelle. And so, you know, things would happen. And there was one day, I think we might have told the story before, where for some reason, Tim and I started calling Janelle Penelope. And it was just really aggravating her. So the more we saw that was aggravating, the more we started calling her Penelope. And at that time, Darlene was out on the deck cooking a couple of cheeseburgers for Tim and I. And she says, you better stop it, you better stop it. And we were like, oh yeah, we'll leave Penelope alone. And of course, you know, Janelle's getting madder and madder. And so Darlene says, hey Janelle, come out here on the deck. And she goes out there and she goes, look it, this is Daddy's hamburger, watch. And she flings it. And it goes flying. And it was like one of those slow motion movies where I was like, no.
It was great.
And then she goes, do you want to do that to Tim's? And she's like, yeah, that looks like fun. And then it went Tim's, you know, and we were able to salvage them and blow the sand and ants off of them and still eat them.
No. Timothy ran out. And this is, I said to Janelle, want to flip a burger? And then I showed her how to, and we had a really long-handled spatula, so that thing flew. Well, Timothy is aghast. So he runs out and he brings his in and he starts washing it under the water. And Ken is like, forget it. They went to McDonald's.
So one of the principles that we learned early on is the 3 R's, and I might have shared this in the past also, but it's so important, and that is that rules without relationship leads to rebellion. And we see this in the nation of Israel, where they always rebelled against the things of God, because in the Old Testament, they really didn't have a dynamic relationship with God like we can have with Jesus Christ in a personal relationship. And so that kind of melts its way down into parenting as well. It's good to have rules, but you have to have relationship as well. Rules without relationship leads to rebellion. Relationship with no rules can also lead to ruin, because either way, it has to be in balance. You have to have that You have to have the rules that you're going to hold them accountable to, but then you also want to have relationship with them. And as she said, we really enjoyed our kids. We had a lot of fun with them. But that was just something that we learned because, the Bible says that children are like arrows and blessed is the man whose quiver is full. And I was always trying to figure out, are they really arrows or are they more like the flaming missiles of the evil one? The little terrorists that come and invade your home. But we really enjoyed them and we had a lot of fun with them. But one of the things we had to learn is that Darlene and I, as husband and wife, really needed to have communication, and we needed to be on the same page, because one of the things that children are absolutely masterminds on is divide and conquer. And if they can find out that we are not in agreement on anything, they're going to go right into that neutral position and start building a wedge. And so they would, we learned really early on that Darlene kind of held rules more than I did. I was kind of like the, let's have fun type guy. And so if they went to Darlene and asked Darlene something and she said no, they would come right to me and ask me the same question. And if we hadn't talked about it, a lot of times I'd be like, oh, sure. And then, of course, now there's conflict starting to take place. So we learned that we needed to be on the same page with one another so that we had the same expectations of our kids and we were both saying the same thing to our children so that they heard the same thing from either one of us. And so because family dynamics are difficult, and whether it's a traditional family or a blended family or a single family, these are all things that we encounter in raising kids. And it's a lot of fun and it's a blast, but like Darlene said, it's a 24/7, and sometimes you'd like to just get away from it, and you can't. You're just on task all the time, so.
Right. And speaking of one parent versus the other, that's how Janelle got the dog. She kept saying, I want to get this dog, I want to get this dog. She was coming back from her training in the Air Force, and Ken would say, ask your mother, because he knew I was going to say no. Well, I got tired of being the person who was saying no, so I said, hey, whatever Daddy says, she's got the dog. Yeah. And he loves the dog. As a matter of fact, he babysat it yesterday. Okay. One of the things that my mom told me that stuck with me and had an extraordinary impact in my life was when we were expecting Janelle. She says, Darlene, don't buy into the terrible twos. People will talk about it's going to be the terrible two. She says, don't buy into that. She says, you kids were fun. I call them the terrific twos. And that gave me a perception and a goal and just a target to shoot for. I had an expectation that they were going to be great. And then I took, when the kids were going to get older, when they were coming to their teen years, I thought, you know what? I'm going to expect the twos were great. I'm going to expect the teens to be great as well. And they were. They were different, but we just had that expectation that it was going to be good. Proverbs 18:21a says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. And so even as my mom's words to me had an impact that stayed with me and affected how I parented, the words that we speak to one another, husband and wife, or to our children are going to have an impact as well. So be kind. Be kind. I've tried to practice that and create an atmosphere where our home was a secure place. And this is just a story on me. Janelle and Tim were very small. And I saw a parent, we were at an event, and I saw a parent talking to their children, and I thought, oh my gosh, it wasn't necessarily they were wrong in what they were saying, but they were saying it in a very harsh manner. And I thought, boy, that's harsh. And the Spirit of God spoke to me with words that I can still remember how it pierced my heart. And he says, Darlene, you can be like that. It's like I had to leave. I cried. And from then, it's like I prayed. It's like, Lord, help me have a sweet spirit. And because it just didn't come naturally to me. Ken is a lot of fun. If it was just me, our kids would probably have marched like a regimental walk, because I tended to be very much more task-oriented. And so I am very thankful for his influence. But in that, so I would pray, so even as we are parenting, as we are learning and growing. Be listening for the voice of God. I am so thankful that He loved me enough to correct me and show me something that was not going to be profitable in my children's lives or in my life. And it did not come easily. I still, to this day, Lord, I pray that I have a sweet spirit, because it wasn't in my DNA to begin with. So those words that we speak are going to produce a harvest in our children and in our family for years to come. It's not, once and done, but they can stay there. And those seeds can grow and bring up wonderful fruit, or they can grow and bring up thorns. So when we miss it, because so many times I missed it, apologize quickly. Mommy's so sorry. She should never have said that. It was just wrong. And I can say it was just a moment. I was unkind. It had no relationship or whatever. And so we also want our kids we wanted Janelle and Tim to learn that the words they used with each other, those made a difference too. You be kind one to another. I don't care that this is your sister or your brother. You be kind. And so we wanted to speak words of life and hope and encouragement to them. Catch them doing something good. Sometimes they just have days where, oh dear Lord, you were 99.9% driving me nuts. But catch that 0.1% where you can catch them doing something good. And this is what I want you to realize, and I have realized, it's never too late to start. You can start, so be kind with your words, or find something good to say, catch them doing something good, and make sure it's not empty. Like, oh man, you did an awesome job. Be specific. Boy, I noticed when you were talking with that person, they were driving you crazy, and yet you kept your temper. So be specific. So it's something they can hang on to.
So one of the things I had to deal with early on when our kids were little, and when we came here to this church, I think Janelle was 3 and Tim was 1 or something like that, or
right, 4.
4,
right, 4 and 1.
4 and 1. And when I came here, the church was very, very busy. We had Sunday morning service, Sunday school, Sunday evening service, Tuesday night men's group, Wednesday evening service. It was very, very busy, and for the most part, I was preaching all those services. So it was not a stretch to be working 60, 65 hours, 70 hours a week. I would be here full time, and then I would do all my sermon preparation at home because there was just so much going on. So I had to really manage my schedule and still keep my kids first place. And Darlene was always, think of it as an investment. Think of it as an investment. So I had little personal time for myself. It was here working, and then at home, and I would enjoy I'd play with the kids. Tim and I spent hours playing Legos. We have boxes and boxes of Legos that we played. That stuff's expensive. And then we made the decision to homeschool, which was really great because it gave us a lot of flexibility with my schedule. If we wanted to go camping, which we would do as a family, we'd do a lot of camping and things, and we'd have a lot of fun. And I learned that even though parenting seems like it lasts forever, it really is a short season. The days seem long, but the years go by quickly. And so Darlene was always reminding me it's an investment. I was up to here with work responsibilities here at the church, and either Tim had a baseball game or Janelle had a piano or voice recital, and I was like, I don't have the time. And she's like, you got to think of it as an investment. So I'm like, yeah, I'm investing. And so, but I would go, and I would honestly enjoy I grew up in a home where the philosophy of, at least my dad anyway, where kids were a pain in the gluteus maximus. I mean, that was kind of like the home that I grew up in. Kids were just a pain and get out of my way. But I really enjoyed our kids. I mean, we had so much fun, and I would read them stories from books. And that's another great thing, sit them on your lap and read them stories. But the stories would never go the right way. What's Squant? Squanto, the story of Squanto, the Indian girl, and I made that. See, the kids learn more, and I made that squat and go. So they laughed, I laughed, she didn't. And we would have dinner. A lot of times we would really schedule dinner. Dinner is a huge time. You know, we live in a very mobile society, and everybody's got electronic devices and TV and all this kind of stuff. But I still think having dinner time as a family is invaluable. And so you might want to talk about Manners Night.
Yes. So one of the things we instituted was Manners Night because we wanted our children to be able to practice at home what we'd expect them to do out in public. Well, with Manners Night, the kids started with 10 dimes in front of them, and Ken and I started with 4 quarters. And the idea was that when we noticed them doing something that was not good behavior, you know, we'd take a dime away. When they caught us, they took a quarter. And it was great because sometimes we would do something on purpose so they could catch it. But just as an aside, Ken ended up having to start with 10 quarters. But in that, so it was something that, you know, so at the end of the night, they got that $1 or $2 that they got from either Ken or I. And it was just a fun way. It's like remembering to say please when you ask for something. And for my family, I made them say, may I please. I wouldn't let them say, oh, can I have this please? It's like, I'm not going to let you throw it on the end as an afterthought. I want it to be at the beginning. But that was just me, remember? I can be a little more strict. And the kids loved it. They had fun. Oh, they were eagle eye. They caught everything. We didn't, it got to the point, I thought we were going to have to like throw them a bone. Oh, no, no, no. They were finding it. That wasn't kind. There goes a quarter. But it worked out. And it was just a fun way to reinforce, we would like you to remember that when you go out, you do say please, you do say thank you, how you treat one another. And it was just a fun way to do it.
In a lot of cultures, burping is a compliment, and it shouldn't cost you a quarter. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yes. Of course, there was also the time that my father taught Tim, when he wanted some milk, just yell, milk! And it's like, no, that is not going to work. Ends now. We need Manners Night. We need an extra one this week. I can tell he's going to lose all his money really quickly. But it was a fun way. So there are fun ways to teach your children, this is what we're going to want you to do when you go out, so let's practice it at home. Because it's unfair to have expectations when they're in public that we're not doing at home. Okay. Did you want to talk about social life? Oh, okay. All right. So the other things, the kids were involved in activities outside of church. They had, Janelle had dance. They both had piano. They had Little League and softball. Tim had Norwalk football. And so it was another way for them to practice how to work in public. It wasn't just a closed atmosphere in their life, just we only know the people at the church and that's all that we do things with. So we wanted to widen their horizons to give them an opportunity to meet other people that were not going to have some of the same ways of looking at life.
Yeah, we wanted them to know some normal people. Ooh, come on, lighten up. That was just a joke. And it goes a quarter.
Yep. And this is pretty normal. But the other thing is that we also wanted to know, when we had these events for them, we really made it, for our family, something that we needed to be at church, and if it was Sunday morning, then we weren't going to be doing it. That's why Tim didn't play like Pee Wee football, because they played Sunday mornings. And we wanted them to learn these are things that are important in life that are going to be important always. So that was our family, and that's why we did it. Go ahead.
So one of the things we kind of learned too along the way through the classes and reading books, and we did read a lot of books, we always tried to stay ahead of the curve. We read about babies when she was pregnant, and then when we had babies, we read about toddlers, and then while they were toddlers, we were reading about pre-adolescence, and we were always educating ourselves ahead of the curve. But one of the things we kind of learned is that from 0 to 5, or from 1 to 5, are the discipline years. From 0 to 5, a child is learning their worldview. They are learning the lenses by which they're going to see life through. They're learning whether life is fair or unfair, whether it's friendly or unfriendly, whether you can have confidence or whether you're going to be afraid. All of that is really being formulated in those early years. And so a lot of training takes place in those early years. And what we find is that a lot of times people want to be friends with their kids, and that's great, but not to the point of still forfeiting your position as parents, because as parents, you have a God-given thing called authority, and that authority has to be upheld. And so, if you don't want misbehavior at 9 or 12, you have to handle it at 1 to 5. You really have to start teaching your kids at that point. And so we really leaned heavily on James Dobson. James Dobson's probably one of the nation's leading child psychologists. He's also a Christian, oversees Focus on the Family. And he was the one that really began teaching about boundaries, that you have to teach your kids boundaries, and that with those boundaries are going to come corporal punishment or spanking. And I know that this is a loaded question. People really get concerned when they hear about spanking. And yet we need to understand that children from 1 to 5 do not have reasoning skills. You cannot reason with a 3 or 4-year-old. You can't. And so this is where this comes into play. And he really did a great job of explaining the fact that these are biblical principles and that children feel safe when they have boundaries. And he talked about an experiment that was done in an inner city playground where they had an inner city school, and there was a playground in that school, and it had a chain link fence all the way around where the kids could play because there were roads around there. It's inner city. And the kids would play and enjoy that entire playground, bouncing up against the fences and enjoying the whole thing. And as an experiment, they took the fences down. And they found out that the kids kind of huddled in the middle and just played right in the center of the playground because they didn't know where the boundaries were anymore. And they knew that there was danger out there. And so by setting concrete boundaries and holding children accountable, and we would teach our kids this is unacceptable behavior. And we would talk to them ahead of time so that they knew what was acceptable and what was unacceptable behavior. And then if it was unacceptable behavior and they were, really testing those boundaries, we would use spanking. And so I just want to show you a couple of scriptures really quick. Here is Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6 that says, "For whom the Lord loves, he disciplines." And so these are biblical principles. God disciplines us. And then Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. He who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. And so here again, here's rules without relationship. And this is really where ego comes from and self-love comes from and good emotional intelligence, emotional health comes from, because kids need to learn that life isn't fair. And they need to learn that there are rules. If they don't learn it in their home, then they're not going to believe it when they go to school or when they deal with the police. They're just going to think these rules don't apply to me because I can get away with things. And so it's important that they learn rules and that there's a punishment involved for breaking those rules. And what we learned is that when we spanked our children at a young age, from 1 to 5, we didn't have to spank them much. Not much at all, because they learned that we meant what we said and we say what we mean. And they learn to respect that authority, which is going to play into later years. Here's Proverbs 23, verse 13. "Do not hold back discipline from a child. Although you strike him with the rod, he won't die." And so, and this is important. I mean, we used a spoon. We had a happy spoon, and I painted a smiley face on one side and a crying face on the other side. We never used our hands because hands were for loving. We always talked to our children beforehand. If they did something wrong, we would sit them down and talk to them about the fact that they were going to get a spanking. And so that they knew it was coming. And we never, ever, ever, ever disciplined out of anger. Because if you're the one that's in control, you never have to lose your cool. You don't have to lose your cool. And then lastly, here's Proverbs 22. And there's so many more, but foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from them. And so a lot of times we had a daycare here when we first came, and of course filled with 3, 4, 5-year-olds. And if parents heard me talking about, do you discipline your children? Oh, I was abused as a kid, and I would never lay a hand on my kid. And I would ask them, well, you were abused, like your parents lost their cool? Oh, yeah, they would start screaming and yelling and then start smacking me. Well, see, that's not parenting. They've already lost their cool. And so you never discipline out of anger. And so, but people have a lot of emotions about this and different values, and that's okay. But I just wanted you to see that in the Word of God, God does teach us that the kid's not going to die. We would always spank them on the butt. We would never hit them in the face or on the arms or legs. And again, we just found out that, when we did this when they were little, we did not have to do it again because there was a little bit, and I'm not talking about leaving marks or anything like that, but just making it count so that there's a pain that they're receiving for disobeying. And it just really helped them understand that we meant what we said. And so Darlene, all she'd have to do is give them a look, and they knew that if they didn't toe the line immediately, and we never counted, we never said 1, 2, because when you do that, you're teaching your kids how to count. You're not teaching them discipline. And I've seen that in supermarkets. I've seen parents saying, you come here, and the kid's not coming. You come now, come, 1. You get here, 2. You get here, 3. You get here. And then they're like, oh, please, would you come back to me? And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're sending so many wrong signals and so many bad signals to your children at that point. So.
There was one instance where I would count. In other words, you need to be to me by the time I hit 3, and I did not count slowly. It was just a reminder to them that
even I was there.
And because these were part of non-negotiables. For our family, we decided we wanted our children to obey, we wanted them to be honest, and we wanted them to be respectful. So for that obedience, if I counted, if it was something, okay, you need to get here by the time I hit 3, 1, 2, 3. And usually they would get it. And sometimes I could just look at them if they were doing something that was not going to be profitable for them, that I didn't want them to continue in that vein, I just look at them and say 2, and they'd get it. They would understand that they knew that was, I didn't have to say anything else. They knew they were going in a direction that was not good, and they just needed to stop then. Did it work every time? No. That's why sometimes Mr. Happy the spoon did come off the wall. Another saying that I had heard from somebody else was obey or pay. One of the things, and it was great, the kids, you could see them doing something, you say, I don't want you to do that. And they just kind of look at you like, I don't know if I want to go for this time, and then would say obey or pay. And they knew it was very short, but it was sending the message that you have a choice, and the choice you make is going to have a consequence. I wasn't preaching an hour sermon. Those 3 little words, obey or pay, you're making a choice, it's going to have a consequence. And you want to be kind. We wanted to be kind. Like I said, I'm still praying for a sweet spirit during this time, and asking that we were more interested that their character was going to come out than in this moment. So those are just little things. Honesty. We wanted them to be honest. It's like no matter what, tell the truth. If they did something and it was totally wrong, say they disobeyed and I didn't see it immediately, or if I asked them a question and if they told us the truth, no spanking. No spanking. I didn't care you could have broken the window. No spanking because you were honest. Would there be other consequences? There may be something depending on what it was, but we wanted them to learn to tell the truth because you can't trust people who lie. And if you're going to lie to me, how will I know the difference between when you're telling the truth and when you're not? So that came from me personally. I learned the hard way as a child. Just kind of like fudge a little. It always came back on me, but I remember the last time I fudged, it's like, yeah, I'm not going there again. It was not good. I earned a very well-deserved spanking, and I never did it again. And then the other thing that we wanted them to learn that was a non-negotiable was having respect, and that's respect for other people and respect for property. So having those goals of being obedient, being honest, being respectful, it helped us have something to shoot for. because this is my goal. So when I can see you're veering off in disrespect, maybe it's in how you're talking to me or your dad, and like Ken would have more leeway. I would pull them in more quickly. Because Ken was having fun. Oh, it's fun when you call me that. It's like, no, it's not. It's not a good thing. So we would take care of that. We wanted to teach them that interrupting people, like being rudely, like, hey, 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 talk to me. It's like, no, that's not going to fly. Respecting, yelling, screaming at me, oh, that is really not going to work. We wanted them to learn to be respectful, because when they're practicing being respectful with us, that was going to translate to when they're out in society and being respectful with other people, and they all got to practice being respectful to each other. Because it's like, no, you're not going to call your sister names. Penelope, that didn't work. There was a consequence. There went the flying burger. Or there was the time that Janelle, Timothy again, let me bug you. The more I bug you, if I bug you enough, you'll finally think it's funny. And he was bugging her. She says, if you keep it up, I'm going to put my gum in your hair. And he says, you keep it up, I'm going to put my gum in your hair. And he kept it up, and she put her gum in his hair, stuck it in. And he comes, Mom, Janelle put her gum in my hair. I said, she warned you. He had no sympathy. And so what happened is I did help him get it out. We used the peanut butter and got all the gum out of the hair. But it's like, you need to learn, honey, that you can't irritate people and irritate them and not expect to have a consequence.
But it's so darn fun.
And yeah.
So one of the things we did is also we parented their emotions as well. A lot of times parents think you just, their obedience, their honesty, their respect or disrespect. And I knew some parents that their kids were really emotional and always breaking down or throwing a nutty, and I said, and I kind of like questioned him once, and he goes, "Oh, they're just emotional." Well, emotions are something that we need to discipline also, because that brings emotional intelligence and emotional health. You can't just throw a nutty. You can't do that when you get a job. You can't just pitch a fit every time. And this is one of the reasons why in America today, it seems like the younger generations are struggling more with emotional intelligence and emotional health than prior generations. This whole participation trophy mindset that everybody's a winner, nobody loses. No, people do lose. That's just real life. And it's healthy to learn that. You're going to lose, but you don't have to like losing. You can work harder at not losing at certain things, but you're all going to lose on certain things. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal when life isn't fair? How do you deal when you don't get your way? You have to learn how to parent those emotions and teach the kids how to handle those emotions. And so again, discipline might be involved. Again, we're still just talking about the 1 to 5 age, but you don't freak out. If you are yelling at your children, you have lost that battle. If you get to the point that they have gotten under your skin so bad that you're now yelling and screaming, you've lost. You never see, well, you shouldn't ever see a police officer yelling and screaming at you. They pull you over, and sometimes they got the nicest, sarcastic tone to their voice. Hey, Mr. Bossy, how's it going today? Really good. You're going a little fast there, weren't you? If you say so. Here's a ticket. Here's a ticket. You have a nice day now. Right? They don't come at you. What do you do? You know why they can do that? Because they have authority. They have authority to give you a ticket. They have authority to give you a violation. And they do it, and they don't have to lose their temper to do that. And so as a parent, you have authority to discipline, to train, to teach, and you don't have to lose your cool to do that. You can stay completely composed. So again, like we would, if Timothy did something, if Janelle did something, and we needed to, in those early years, give them a spanking, we'd sit them down. And this was our go-to scripture was Ephesians. where it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, which is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise that it'll go well with you and you will live long on the earth. And so I remember one time I had to discipline Tim, and I had him sitting next to me on the bed, and I had the spoon in my hand, and I said, Tim, I said, you know what happened? You pushed it too far, and you crossed a limit that we would not accept, and you know what's coming. I said, what's going to happen? Oh, I know, Dad. Just give me the spanking, so I'll live long on the earth. And so they learned really well, and it was a lot of fun. And then the next thing is the training years. And the training years, from 5 to 12, you're really not going to give spankings from this point on. You might use timeouts, you might use restrictions or things like that. But now you're starting to back off using spankings at that age. And this is the school years where you want to encourage them to get a good education. This is where church really becomes important, that they learn to go to church for their own benefit and for their own value. And they learn self-sufficiency. They learn that they can be contributing part to the world, which is very, very healthy. They learn that the world doesn't go around them, that the sun turns on when they wake up in the morning, because again, the younger generation today is one of the most entitled generations in American history, and they just feel entitled, and like if you don't validate them, they're going to sue you, and all kinds of crazy things that go on. But these are the years that we did a lot of things again with them and spent a lot of time camping, and stories are huge at this time. We let them know that PG-13 meant PG-13. It worked better
for Janelle.
For Janelle, it didn't work that great for Tim at that time. But they learned a lot of things, and so and I'm going to move right on to the next one, which is the coaching years, and that's 12 to 18.
So in this time, there's a really great scripture that can be foundational for this time in our parenting, and that is James 1:9, where it says, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For me, I tend to be a thinker. Janelle, on the other hand, is a talker. So for us, coaching was great for her because, I would listen, and she would talk and talk and talk. And so she is processing as she's talking. I'm having fits as she's processing because she's going places like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Why are you saying that? And I just finally learned I had to wait until she got done because she arrived where she needed to be. But the trip of listening to her for me was, it was like a roller coaster. It was very difficult, and it took me years to learn that, years. It's probably like within the last 10 years, I finally got it. And so just wait that. So coaching is a great perspective to think of these, because coaching is you're listening to your kids, and then you are using their words, helping them come up with solutions to where they are. So essentially it came down to talk less and listen more. One of the things that I found helpful was to pray that God would give me eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to understand what I needed to know in that moment about the kids. And sometimes God would tell me something, and it wasn't necessarily something for me to share with them, but it would be something for me to how to approach to them, how to relate to them, because still, these are our kids. We love them. We want them to grow up and be able to be adults that can be adults, not just in age only. Another thing that we learned was letting them fail. Ken mentioned this earlier. And the benefits is let them fail when they're really young, because the stakes are smaller, the consequences aren't big things, but let them fall, let them fail. They learn, one, that God doesn't fall off the throne, the world doesn't end. You can help them process and walk through it, help them get better, and help them overcome. So everybody's better off. It's a learning thing. None of us ever arrive. Like I said, God, as an adult, God would speak to me and correct me. And He still loves me. And so enjoy our kids. Enjoy them where they are. for how they are, and we still continue to pray that God would continue to do a work, but never give up hope. You know, have that expectation. And just even having that mindset was just like the terrible twos were the terrific twos. Have that in your mind. It's not over. They're still breathing. I'm still praying. And God, I know that you're going to do a good work. I know that you're going to bring good stuff out of this. And somewhere as they leave those coaching, they never totally leave the coaching years, because we can always listen and we can always help them come to an awareness. But as they get into their 20s, then we're going to start to see a transition to more, we can be friends with them. You can hang out, you can go places together and have that relationship as equals. You won't necessarily be peers because there's still the age difference. But that friendship, if they're still living in your home and not contributing much, that's not the time to go for friends. It's like, no, you are my friend when you're an adult and you are adulting. It means you're taking adult responsibilities, adult decisions, you're paying your way. That's when that transition for me, or for us, that's when we decided it would happen more. But until you're at that place, well, you may be, I still enjoy you, but you're not my friend yet. I'm still your parent, but we will get there.
So Janelle seemed to have a lot more friends with inside of the church, and Timothy, it just worked out that there weren't a lot of boys his age in the church when he was in the church, so he made a lot of friends outside of the church, which is always a little scary because, he'd talk about going over to Sullivan's house and hanging out with them, and we were very concerned of who are these shady people, but yeah. No, that's not kind at all. A wonderful family, wonderful kids that they have of their own, did a great job raising their kids, and Tim, fell into that whole group because there was a ton of them. You were like the Kool-Aid mom for the neighborhood, weren't you? You just had like everybody there, and so it was a great group of people for him to transition to. And I just want to show a quick little video. Hopefully it'll be...
As you've just heard, my wife and I are the parents of 6 children. If you look closely at the screen, you'll also note something interesting about my family, and that is that my 6 children are all daughters. This is Chanel with a couple of her friends in our kitchen goofing off, and Chanel's just turned 17. I was driving to work with her, and I could tell as she drove that she was not happy. It might have been the way that she revved through the 6 gears on her way to top speed in the 60 zone, and she just wasn't happy. And I commented, I said, Chanel, you seem like you're unhappy. And she rolled her eyes, and I said, I get a sense that you're unhappy with me. And she said, yes, Dad, I am. And I said, I'm so glad that you've told me that. Could you tell me why? She said, well, sure. Today I found out that 2 weeks ago, all of my friends had a party and they didn't invite me, and I only just found out about it today. And when I asked them why they didn't invite me, they said, well, because it was the kind of party that Dr. Justin Coulson wouldn't have approved of. And for those of you for whom the penny didn't drop, I'm Dr. Justin Coulson. And straight away I felt so bad for her. I thought, oh my goodness, my parenting is causing my daughter to be ostracized and isolated and to feel horrible and to miss out on opportunities to be with her friends. But do I want her to have those opportunities? And I looked at her and I said, if they didn't invite you to a party that I wouldn't approve of, it sounds like there probably were a few things going on that are not consistent with our values. Was there alcohol being consumed and potentially misused? She said, yes. I said, were there other drugs being consumed and potentially misused? She said, almost certainly. I said, were people disappearing into rooms for intimate encounters that they may or may not regret the next day? She said, possibly. I said, well, I'm really glad you weren't there. And so I said, do we need to revisit the rules? She looked at me, she said, Dad, I know why we have the rules. I've been part of the conversations, remember? I said, okay. I said, I want to ask you a tough question. You're nearly an adult. You're a year and a bit off being an adult. Now, I think these are good rules, but do we need to rethink the rules? And then I waited and my heart pounded. And eventually she said, Dad, I don't like the rules. And my heart stopped. And I said, And I started to think of how to respond. And as I was thinking, she jumped in and added something else for me. She said, right now, Dad, I don't like the rules one little bit. But they're good rules. I think we should keep them. This is the kind of line that every parent dreams of hearing from their kids. The heavens opened and the angels started singing, and I just wanted to hug her. I was like, yes. If you paid attention to the story, you don't get it by saying, well, damn it, they're good rules and I expect that you will keep them. That's part of being in this family. That's called control. And that's not how we get to this point. Instead, we get it through this thing called autonomy. Force creates resistance. But great relationships build autonomy, which allows us to leverage trust, which builds massive influence. Thank you.
So in closing, I think this is something we actually learned from a marriage seminar, but 7 habits for healthy marriages. But I think it applies for parenting too, and that is to begin with the end in mind. When you start parenting, what is your goal? What is your vision? What do you want that product to be at the end of 18, 20 years? And begin with that right from the time that they're first brought home from the hospital. Begin with that process of this is the direction you're going to go. And listen, it is not easy. And like I said, we made tons and tons of mistakes that we wish we could undo, and you can't, but you trust God and you put them in God's hands. And that's why we dedicate children. It's a very important thing. And many times I go back and I say, Lord, I've dedicated these kids to you, and I trust you, I believe you with their futures, that you care for them even more than I do. So let's pray. Father, we're so thankful for the fact that we can be instructed in parenting from your word and look at scriptures. And maybe some of this we don't agree with, and it's like eating a fish. You throw the bones away and you take the good part. And I pray that today that people would take the good parts, what they felt might have ministered to them, what might have helped them, and that we might be able to just use it to reflect that into the lives of other people when we get an opportunity.